The sky over Fort Eisenhower burned with the first wave of orbital strikes, a storm of fire ripping through steel and asphalt. Sergeant Nathan "Grizz" Calloway tightened his grip on the command hatch of his M1A2 Abrams as shockwaves rolled through the earth. The brass had predicted some kind of extraterrestrial contact eventually, but no one had expected an invasion. From the gunner's seat, Staff Sergeant Luis "Gonzo" Gonzalez scanned the horizon through his sights. "They're calling us primitive, Sarge. Broadcasting on all frequencies. Some real smug-sounding bastards." "Yeah." Calloway grunted, adjusting his radio. "What are they saying?" A static-filled voice crackled over the feed. The alien transmission was translated in real time by the base's failing AI. "Humans of Sol 3, your war machines are obsolete. Your projectiles crude. Your resistance is an act of irrational defiance. Surrender and be integrated." Gonzo spat onto the floor. "Yeah, well, let's see how they like irrational defiance up their alien asses." Specialist Cody "Boomer" McMillan, the tank's driver, revved the engine. "What's the plan, boss?" "Half our comms are down, and it looks like the Air Force got wiped off the map." Calloway didn't answer immediately. He watched the alien warforms descend through the smoke. Six-legged walkers with smooth, obsidian plating, hovering attack drones buzzing like steel wasps, and massive troop carriers that belched out reptilian soldiers in sleek battle armor. Their arrogance was evident in the way they moved. No formations. No concern for human counterattacks. Just the slow, calculated march of an army convinced it had already won. Calloway keyed his radio, reaching out to the remnants of the 3rd Armored. "All units still kicking. Rally at Grid Kilo 9er. We're forming a kill box." Only 3 other tank crews responded. Calloway could hear the edge of panic in some of their voices. It didn't matter. They had to fight. Gonzo adjusted his targeting computer as Boomer gunned the Abrams forward, crunching debris under its treads. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Calloway nodded. "Yeah. They're underestimating us." The first enemy walker to step into range barely reacted as Gonzo lined up a sabot round and squeezed the trigger. The shell slammed into its knee joint, shearing metal, and the war form collapsed with an almost organic shriek. The crew erupted in a chorus of victory, but Calloway kept his focus. Reload. Hit the next one before they wise up. The battlefield exploded into chaos. Alien infantry scrambled for cover as human armor rumbled into position, letting loose with depleted uranium rounds. Energy blasts from the Zalzor walkers left molten craters in the ground, but their targeting systems lagged behind the Abrams' speed. A second walker went down, then a third, as the tanks moved in coordinated bursts, never staying in one place long enough to be zeroed in on. Boomer took a sharp turn behind the husk of a wrecked Humvee, narrowly avoiding a plasma blast. "I swear to God, these things don't know how to fight a proper war. They're used to killing civilizations before they reach this stage," said Private First Class Marcus Jinx Holloway, the tank's loader. He slammed another round into the breech, sweat glistening on his forehead. "Don't know what to do when someone hits back." The radio crackled again. "Human Armor Division, this is Zalzor Forward Command. Your resistance is illogical. Your weapons are relics. We are offering you a final." Calloway cut them off by ordering Gonzo to put a sabot round directly into one of their broadcasting drones. The explosions scattered metal across the battlefield. "That answer your offers," Gonzo muttered. The Zalzor finally started adapting. The walkers crouched lower, reinforcing their defenses, and the drones began coordinating precision strikes. The Abrams rocked as an energy bolt glanced off its composite armor, leaving a deep scorch mark. Jinx cursed, loading another shell as Gonzo returned fire, destroying an advancing Zalzor formation in a hail of tungsten. "Tank 2 just bought it," came a voice over the radio. Calloway swore under his breath. 3 tanks left, facing an enemy with superior numbers and firepower. They needed to shift tactics. "Boomer, head for the underpass. We're gonna use the bridge for cover." "Gonzo, load he rounds. We're taking out those troop carriers before they get more boots on the ground." The Abrams veered toward a wrecked overpass, its treads grinding through rubble. Plasma fire rained down, narrowly missing as the crew maneuvered into position. The other tanks followed, forming a tight defensive line. 3 hostiles inbound. Calloway took a deep breath. "Wait for my mark, now." The tanks fired in unison, sending a wall of explosive force into the advancing enemy. The first troop carrier erupted in a chain reaction of fire and twisted metal. Alien soldiers were flung like ragdolls as the second and third transports crashed into the ground, spilling panicked Zalzor troops. Calloway switched to the external speaker. "Not so primitive now, huh?" Silence. Then, the alien forces began retreating, their formations breaking apart as the remaining tanks pressed the attack. "Push forward," Calloway ordered. The Abrams surged ahead, crushing fallen Zalzor under its weight. The battle wasn't over. Far from it, but today, humanity had delivered its first lesson to the invaders. Never underestimate a man in a tank. The sky remained choked with smoke as the surviving tank crews regrouped under the skeletal remains of an overpass. The battle had been a costly victory, but a victory nonetheless. Calloway crouched beside his Abrams, running a gloved hand over the scorched plating. The armor had held against the Zalzor's energy weapons for now. Gonzo sat cross-legged on the tank's tread, reloading his sidearm. "They're gonna wise up, Sarge. Next time, they won't just waltz in like they own the place." "They still think we're cavemen throwing rocks at the moon," Calloway replied, glancing at the distant glow of alien troop movements. "But they're learning, which means we need to be smarter." Boomer let out a low whistle as he wiped down the Abrams' main gun. "Damn shame about the other crews. 3 tanks left ain't exactly an armored division." Jinx grunted, shoving another shell into storage. "No, but it's a start." The radio crackled with static before resolving into a voice. "All surviving 3rd Armored Elements report to Forward Ops at Grid Lima 7. We're regrouping for counteroffensive." "Counteroffensive," Boomer muttered. "We barely held them back the first time." Calloway wasn't in the mood for defeatist talk. "Mount up. If command says we're hitting back, we're hitting back." The Abrams rumbled to life, and the remaining tanks rolled out toward the designated rendezvous point. As they neared the coordinates, the extent of humanity's losses became painfully clear. What had once been a fortified military outpost was now a cratered wasteland littered with burning wreckage. The few remaining officers had set up a command post in the ruins of a parking garage. Inside, Colonel Harris, a grizzled veteran with a missing eye and a permanent scowl, stood hunched over a holographic map. When Calloway and his crew entered, Harris barely looked up. "You the ones who held the Zalzor off at Eisenhower?" "Yes, sir," Calloway replied. "Good. You just bought us time, but it won't mean a damn thing if we don't adapt." The colonel gestured to the map. "We've been analyzing captured wreckage. Their walkers rely on a power distribution network. They don't have internal reactors. Everything runs off a central energy field projected from these pylons." He pointed to several locations marked deep within alien-controlled territory. Gonzo frowned. "So, if we take out the pylons—" "Their armor's worthless," Harris confirmed. "But there's more. We pulled data from a wrecked drone. Turns out their targeting algorithms are garbage at predicting human movement. They're optimized for fighting species with symmetrical tactics. They don't know how to handle unpredictability. Boomer let out a laugh. Guess that explains why they kept missing. Harris turned his one good eye on Calloway. We're forming strike teams. Fast-moving armor and infantry squads to hit these pylons. You in? Calloway didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. Hours later, the tanks were on the move again, this time under the cover of night. The Zalzor still held numerical and technological superiority, but they were slow to adapt, overconfident in their presumed supremacy. That arrogance would cost them. Rolling through the skeletal remains of a ruined city, the Abrams led the charge. The plan was simple. Hit the nearest energy pylon, cripple the enemy's battlefield systems, and get out before the Zalzor could mount a counterattack. Jinx adjusted his scope from the loader's hatch. I see the target. Looks like some kind of floating monolith, glowing like a damn Christmas tree. Any hostiles? Calloway asked. Couple of walkers on perimeter defense. Drones on overwatch. Gonzo rotated the turret, lining up a shot. Permission to light em up. Hold, Calloway ordered. Let's see if we can get closer first. Boomer maneuvered the Abrams through the rubble, staying low behind the remains of a collapsed office building. The other tanks followed suit, moving with a level of stealth that seemed absurd for multi-ton war machines. Then, a sudden burst of light. A drone had spotted them. Go loud, Calloway barked. Gonzo fired first, a sabot round tearing through the nearest walker. The other tanks followed, their cannons belching fire and smoke. The Zalzor scrambled to react, but the humans pressed forward with relentless aggression. Plasma blasts scorched the ground, but the tanks wove through the destruction, using the ruins as cover. The pylon loomed ahead, a pulsating tower of alien energy. Calloway knew they had only one chance. Jinx, load heat. Gonzo, aim for the base of that thing. On it, Jinx confirmed, shoving a high-explosive round into the breach. Gonzo exhaled slowly, steadied his aim, and pulled the trigger. The shell streaked through the night and slammed into the pylon's foundation. The explosion that followed was blinding. Energy arced wildly as the monolith collapsed in on itself, sending a shockwave rippling across the battlefield. The effect was immediate. The remaining walkers jerked to a halt, their glowing power sources flickering. Some toppled over entirely, their systems failing without the pylon's field. Hell yeah. Boomer cheered. Calloway wasn't celebrating yet. Move. Before they regroup. The tanks roared back toward friendly lines, leaving behind a battlefield of burning wreckage and crippled war machines. The Zalzor had learned a painful lesson tonight. Humanity wasn't fighting with outdated relics. They were adapting, and they were winning. The victory at the pylon sent shockwaves through both human and Zalzor forces. Intelligence reports intercepted garbled transmissions, confusion, disbelief, desperation. The aliens had built their war doctrine on the assumption that humans were primitive, their weapons outdated, and incapable of countering advanced energy-based technology. The battlefield had proved them wrong. Inside a dimly lit underground command center, Calloway and his crew stood before a holographic map, listening to Colonel Harris outline their next move. The room was filled with the scent of oil, sweat, and the faint tang of ozone from overworked electronics. Engineers worked tirelessly in the background, modifying armor, retrofitting munitions, and scavenging alien tech for anything that could be repurposed. Their forces are in disarray, Harris said, his voice gravelly with exhaustion. But they're not done. They're reorganizing around secondary power sources and doubling down on defenses. We've hurt them, but now they're adapting. Jinx cracked his knuckles. That makes two of us. Harris tapped the display. We've located another high-value target, an Zalzor command nexus. It's a mobile command center heavily fortified, directing battlefield coordination. Take that out, and we cripple their response time. Boomer frowned. They won't be caught off guard this time. They won't, Harris agreed. That's why we're bringing something new. A metal door groaned open at the far end of the command center. The room's lighting flickered as two massive vehicles rolled into view. At first glance, they resembled standard Abrams tanks, but these had been altered, thicker plating reinforced turrets, and something new mounted along the hulls. Salvage Zalzor energy weapons. Calloway stepped forward, running a hand over the reinforced armor. What the hell are we looking at? Lieutenant Ashford, a wiry engineer covered in grease and burns, grinned. We're calling them Bastions. Standard Abrams chassis, but we've incorporated alien shielding tech and retrofitted some of their plasma arrays. It's crude, but it works. Gonzo let out a low whistle. We're using their own weapons against them. Ashford nodded. They said our weapons were primitive. Guess they didn't think we'd take theirs. The next day, before dawn, the strike force assembled on the outskirts of the ruined city. The air was thick with mist and the distant hum of alien machinery. The Bastions rolled alongside the remaining Abrams, their presence a symbol of how quickly humans could turn adversity into advantage. Calloway climbed onto his tank, headset crackling, as he checked in with the team. Everyone set. Boomer responded first. Rolling hot. Jinx checked the rounds. Locked and loaded. Gonzo adjusted the turret. Let's give them hell. They advanced under the cover of the ruined skyline, moving with purpose but caution. Zalzor patrols hovered in the distance, their movements erratic, unsure. The alien war doctrine had never accounted for human unpredictability, and that uncertainty was working in their favor. Then, the first shot rang out. A Zalzor walker detected their approach, opening fire with a searing blast of plasma. The lead Abrams swerved, narrowly avoiding the impact, but the ground exploded in a fiery eruption. Contact. Gonzo swung the turret, firing an armor-piercing round that shattered the walker's leg, sending it crashing into the rubble. The Bastions engaged next. Blue streaks of repurposed plasma fire lanced across the battlefield, melting through enemy armor. The Zalzor had adapted, but so had humanity. The battlefield erupted into chaos. Drones swarmed overhead, but Jinx took them down with well-placed sniper fire from the loader's hatch. Walkers advanced in formation, only to be shredded by a combination of kinetic rounds and alien energy blasts. The Bastions proved their worth, tanking damage that would have once torn through steel, their reinforced plating absorbing impacts that should have been fatal. Calloway pushed forward. Keep moving. Don't give M time to regroup. The command nexus loomed ahead, a massive construct of dark metal and pulsating energy, its alien glyphs glowing ominously. Defensive emplacements lined its perimeter, but they were built to counter aerial and infantry assaults, not an armored spearhead. Boomer revved the engine, plowing through debris as the Abrams took position. Target locked. Calloway clenched his jaw. Hit it with everything we've got. The Bastions fired first, twin plasma cannons discharging into the command nexus. The impact sent a ripple through the structure, distorting its energy field. The Abrams followed with a devastating volley of sabot rounds, punching through weakened defenses. A deafening explosion followed as the command nexus collapsed in on itself, its alien core overloading in a cascade of fire and shrapnel. The remaining Zalzor forces hesitated. Then, to everyone's surprise, they began retreating. Jinx exhaled, lowering his rifle. They're falling back. Gonzo shook his head in disbelief. We actually broke them. Boomer let out a triumphant laugh. Hell yeah, we did. Calloway didn't celebrate just yet. He watched the retreating Zalzor, Their formations scattered, their command structure shattered. They had won this battle, but the war wasn't over. Not yet. The battlefield was silent in a way that felt unnatural. Smoke still curled from the ruins of the Zalzor Command Nexus, and the scorched earth bore deep craters where alien and human weaponry had clashed. But the enemy had retreated. What remained was an eerie stillness, punctuated only by the crackling of fire and the distant whine of malfunctioning alien machinery. Calloway stood atop his tank, helmet in hand, watching the horizon. The Zalzor weren't done. He knew it. This wasn't the kind of enemy that gave up so easily. They had underestimated humanity, assumed their technology made them superior. They had believed human tanks, shells, and projectile weapons were relics of a bygone era. And yet, those same primitive weapons had torn through their war machines and sent them running. Jinx leaned against the hull, wiping sweat and grime from his face. So what now? Boomer hopped down from his tank, rolling his shoulders. They're running scared. Maybe this is it. Calloway shook his head. Not a chance. Gonzo kicked at a fallen alien rifle, its sleek design marred by dirt and battle damage. Yeah, they don't seem like the cut-and-run type. So what's the play? Before Calloway could answer, the radio crackled. Harris's voice came through, tense but measured. Recon drones just picked up movement. A lot of it. They're regrouping. Estimated numbers suggest they're throwing everything they've got into a final assault. The silence that followed was thick. No one had expected an easy win, but the idea that the Zalzor were willing to push this hard, despite their losses, meant one thing: desperation. Calloway exhaled slowly. They know they can't beat us in a drawn-out fight, so they're going all in. Harris didn't disagree. We've broken their tactics, but they still have superior numbers. We hold here, or we lose the entire front. Jinx straightened, adjusting his rifle sling. Then we hold. Boomer grinned. Damn right. Gonzo cracked his knuckles. One last fight. Let's make it count. The preparations began immediately. Engineers and mechanics worked double time, reloading, refueling, patching up damaged tanks. The bastions, their hybrid human-alien firepower now battle-tested, were refitted with additional shielding. Infantry dug in, reinforcing defensive positions along the wreckage-strewn city outskirts. The storm came at dusk. First, the sky darkened with the arrival of Zalzor carriers, massive vessels that hovered like predatory birds, their undersides disgorging swarms of smaller attack craft. Then came the ground forces, dozens of walkers, energy-clad shock troops, and automated drone swarms, all advancing in disciplined formation. This was no longer an army fighting to conquer. This was a force fighting to annihilate. Calloway sat in the command seat of his Abrams, fingers tightening on the controls. Hold your fire until they're in range. The first shots came from the Zalzor, streaks of burning plasma cutting through the dim light. They hammered against reinforced barricades, melting steel and concrete, but the line held. Then, the tanks roared to life. Boomer was the first to fire, his shells screaming through the air before slamming into the lead walker's core. The explosion sent shrapnel in all directions, toppling two more behind it. The bastions followed suit, their alien-enhanced weaponry spitting blue fire into the charging enemy ranks. Jinx picked off advancing shock troops from his sniper's perch, each shot precise, calculated. Gonzo directed artillery fire, coordinating strikes that sent Zalzor formations into chaos. Calloway maneuvered through the battlefield, issuing orders, adjusting positions, keeping the line from breaking. But the Zalzor had learned, too. Their tactics shifted, their shock troops using portable shields to close the distance. Drone swarms targeted weak points in human defenses, forcing Calloway's forces into a brutal, close-range fight. An alien gunship swooped in low, targeting one of the bastions with a concentrated energy blast. The shield flickered, then collapsed. Calloway's heart pounded. "Boomer, take out." Boomer didn't hesitate. His turret swiveled, and a sabot round punched through the gunship's hull. It spiraled out of control before smashing into the ruins below, detonating in a plume of alien fire. Still, the enemy pressed on. A walker crushed through the barricades, plasma cannons whirring to life. It fired, and an Abrams to Calloway's left erupted in flames. "Hold the damn line," he roared. The bastions pushed forward, acting as mobile fortresses, drawing fire while the remaining tanks flanked. Jinx took down the Zalzor field commanders one by one, forcing disarray among their ranks. Gonzo coordinated the last of the artillery strikes, cutting off their reinforcements. The battle stretched into the night. Exhaustion clawed at every soldier, but they fought on. Every time the Zalzor adjusted, humans adapted faster. Every strategy they deployed, humans countered with ingenuity, grit, and sheer force of will. Then the tipping point came. The Zalzor forces hesitated. Their formations crumbled. Some turned to retreat. Others fought on, only to be cut down by relentless firepower. By dawn, the battlefield was still again. The last of the Zalzor forces had either fled or been destroyed. Smoke curled from the remains of their war machines. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burnt metal and scorched earth. Calloway climbed out of his tank, surveying the carnage. The cost had been high, but they had won. Not just the battle, the war. The Zalzor had called human weaponry primitive. They had dismissed tanks, shells, and rifles as outdated relics. And they had been slaughtered by them. Boomer sat on the edge of his tank, exhausted but grinning. "They ain't coming back from that one." Jinx exhaled. "Damn right." Gonzo looked around at the wreckage, shaking his head. "They thought we were weak, that we'd roll over and die." Calloway ran a hand over the battered hull of his tank, feeling the heat of battle still radiating from the metal. They won't make that mistake again. Above them, the sun rose over a battlefield that had once been humanity's last stand. Now, it was a graveyard for those who had underestimated them.